Thank you very much to the organizers of the seminar for giving us, as the Commission, the opportunity to speak about the EEA agreement and to give our views on how it functions and what our role is on the other side of the table, if you want to put it like that. I am from the Secretariat-General of the Commission, and I will just explain to you how we are organized in the Commission for dealing with our close friends and neighbors, including the 3 EEA EFTA countries. I work in a directorate which is called Western European Partners. This is a relatively recently created directorate, and it comprises 3 units. We have 2 units who deal with the United Kingdom. So one deals with the implementation of the withdrawal agreement, and this has been very much in the news in the last week with the agreement with the UK on the Windsor framework. So we have one unit dealing with that. We have a second unit on the UK, which deals with the trade and cooperation agreement. And then we have the third unit, which is the unit where I work, which has the wonderful title of EEA, Switzerland, Andorra, Monaco, and San Marino. So we deal with those Western European partners in the unit where I work. As I said, this is a relatively new creation in the Commission, and this is also because in January 2022, we took over a number of responsibilities from the European External Action Service, which was previously managing the EEA agreement on the EU side. So you can see from the way that we coordinate the management of the EEA agreement in the SecGen of the Commission, we do this in the broader context of relations with other Western European partners at the same time. Now, of course, our relations with those other countries are different in terms of history, starting points, existing agreements, and where we might want to go in the future. But it goes without saying, of course, as the previous speaker said, that the EU's relationship with the EEA EFTA states is unique, and the functioning of that relationship cannot be compared to the relationship with any other country because it is so close. Now, part of the responsibility of our unit in the Commission is the day-to-day management of the EEA agreement on the EU side. But of course, we don't do that alone because we are still a relatively small team in comparison. We do that in cooperation with our colleagues in the line DGs of the Commission, who are responsible for the individual policy areas and the relevant legislation, and of course with our colleagues in the legal service of the Commission. So I'll explain to you how we do that job. And this takes various forms, in fact. First thing means coordination inside the Commission. So, for example, on the preparation of the EEA joint committee decisions. And I don't want to get too much into the internal technicalities of how the Commission functions, but when we are preparing a proposal or an initiative, we need to have an internal consultation of all of the Commission services, what we term inter-service consultation. So when it comes to draft EEA joint committee decisions, it's my unit which is responsible for the coordination of that process. And of course, on that, we also work very closely with colleagues in the EFTA Secretariat, who are the ones who come up with the initial draft text of a joint committee decision when we are at the preparatory stage. Secondly, our role also means representation of the Commission in the EFTA Working Party of the Council. And this is the preparatory body in the Council where EEA issues and issues concerning the other countries that I mentioned are discussed in the Council. So, for example, when a draft EEA Joint Committee decision contains substantive adaptations, they need to be presented and explained to the members of the Working Party. And once they are approved, then the EU position on the JCD is then formalized through a decision of the Council. And then thirdly, we also represent the Union, and we chair on the EU side the meetings of the EEA Joint Subcommittees and the EEA Joint Committee, which meets 8 times a year, and this is the body which is responsible for the formal adoption of the Joint Committee decisions. And as Para mentioned, it's very important to underline that the vast majority of those JCDs are intended to maintain the level playing field across the enlarged internal market of 30 countries. And so this brings me to the subject on which I was asked to speak today, which was 30 years of the internal market. Now, as things turn out, I'm speaking to you today just a few days before the Commission is due to adopt a communication on the single market at 30. So I won't dare to preempt what the College of Commissioners will say next week when this communication is adopted. But I would urge you to have a look at it when it comes out and to pay attention to what our political leaders will be saying when they present it next week. But it is still useful to go back to the original intention when the internal market was first conceived and designed in the mid-1980s, so almost 40 years ago. And at that time, President Delors of the Commission, he had proposed 3 projects to then 10 member states of the European Community. And the 3 things that he had proposed to them were either a common currency, a common defense, or simply an institutional reform that would make it possible to extend qualified majority voting. This might sound rather theoretical, but this shift to qualified majority voting was very important when it came to actually setting up and then getting the internal market functioning and running in the way that we know today. So member states agreed at that time to the broad extension of qualified majority voting through the Single European Act in 1987. And it was largely this which generated the impetus to set up a genuine single market across the member states by 1992 in the areas of the free movement of people, services, good and capital, overcoming the previous fragmentation of the national markets. And Delors has since characterized the basis of the single market using 3 phrases, which are competition that stimulates, cooperation that strengthens, and solidarity that unites. So these are the core elements of the single market that still remain very valid today, as valid as they were at the beginning. So it's on this basis that the single market has been developed over the years, not only through the necessary regulatory approach, but also by the broader political framework. And this has been implemented not just by the Commission, but also in cooperation with the other EU institutions, notably the Parliament and the Council, and of course with the member states. And I think it's fair to say that the internal market has become one of the cornerstones of the development of the European Union. On the political level, it's often referred to variously by commissioners as the crown jewel of the European Union, an engine for growth, jobs and resilience, a source of prosperity, and a key asset that must be protected, nurtured and refined. And over the years, we have seen countless European Parliament resolutions, Council conclusions on the internal market, discussions in the European Council, a very long list of political level statements, all speaking in favor of the importance of the internal market and the need to make sure that it continues to be upheld. Now, one of the important things to glean from these political level declarations is the constant and continuous striving to complete the internal market, strengthen, deepen the internal market, remove remaining unjustified barriers, future-proof the internal market, restore the integrity of the internal market, make it more resilient and competitive. So these, I'm quoting from documents, these kind of phrases come up all the time when at the political level they want to give impetus to the sustainability of the internal market, if I can put it like that. So it's a never-ending project. We are continuously consolidating what has been achieved, guarding against slipping backwards, ensuring that it can be adaptable in the light of societal, technological challenges and evolutions, and also in able to respond to the way that we do business and also the union's interaction with the rest of the world. But we have to remember that the internal market is not just about institutions, member states, big companies, financial markets. It's also about citizens, small businesses, micro enterprises, citizens, students, people who want to move, work, set up a business in another member state. And here it's interesting, if you look at the regular series of Eurobarometer surveys, which are conducted for the Commission and the European Parliament, you will see that the internal market and the benefits that it provides are very much at the forefront of the minds of EU citizens when they are asked for their views about the European Union. Now we did a specific survey at the beginning of 2022 on the future of Europe. So this was conducted after the worst of the COVID-19 pandemic, but just before the war in Ukraine broke out. But in that survey, the heading "Respect for Democracy, Human Rights and Rule of Law" was identified as the #1 main asset of the European Union. But in the next 3 positions, they were assets which all have a strong link to the internal market and how it functions, and I will list them. Economic, industrial and trading power of the EU, the good relationship and solidarity between EU member states, and thirdly, the standard of living of EU citizens. And this heading, standard of living, was the #1 issue in 16 member states, and particularly high in some of the newer member states. And the heading, economic and industrial power of the EU, was #1 in 6 member states. So we can ask, why is there such a strong attachment to the internal market when people are asked what they think about the European Union? And for that, we need to point out a few basic features and benefits. First, the internal market. Single market gives people the opportunity to travel, work around the EU. It allows goods, services and money to move around as freely as within a single country. And this has become an integral part of European life for all of us. We all experience it every day. And these opportunities create more choice when it comes to products and services for consumers all across the EU and across the EEA. A second thing, well-functioning single market requires everyone to play by the same rules. And that's why consumers can trust that the products and services that they buy across the internal market are safe and they meet agreed performance requirements, and that companies respect rules on labor and environmental protection. And the single market also helps us to project these high standards and values to the rest of the world. Thirdly, single market also helps companies, especially small ones, to attract investment and grow across the EU and globally. And it also protects companies from possible shocks to their supply chains, makes it easier for them to find new suppliers and partners. So in this way, the single market has helped companies to connect and overcome difficulties like they experienced in the recent COVID pandemic. And it has also enabled the EU to deliver, for example, life-saving vaccines and to lead the global response to the crisis. And the fourth thing I would mention about the single market is that it's Europe's best answer to help tackle the impacts of climate change, to develop a more sustainable and circular economy and society, and to take full advantage of the digital revolution. So it allows for the scaling of innovative solutions across the continent, and it helps the EU, EEA, to secure access to new technologies, critical raw materials, clean energy, infrastructure, financing, and skills. All of these are needed for the green and digital transitions. So that's the abstract level, but I can also mention a few headline figures that help to demonstrate the scope, the impact, and the potential of the internal market. It's a market of more than 450 million consumers, biggest in the world. It represents 18% of world gross domestic product. Member states trade more within the EU, 18% of world trade, than with the rest of the world, 13%. Within the single market, we have 23 million companies, and in 2021, the GDP was 14,522 billion. We have 17 million EU citizens who live and work in a country that's not their own. And we estimate that trade within the single market accounts for an estimated 56 million jobs. I have more examples, but in the interest of time, I will move on. So these examples that I mentioned, they are all tangible benefits to citizens and businesses, enjoying equal rights and subject to the same obligations within the internal market. And of course, it's important to recognize that the market has adapted and developed in pace with a political, economic, and societal change over the past 30 years. And it will continue to do so in the future as we deal with more issues that are related to the green and digital transitions and other policy and societal challenges. I mentioned earlier the origins of the internal market in the mid-1980s. At that time, the European Community was a group of 10 Western European countries, so very different from what it is today. And we didn't know then, but efforts to put in place the internal market at that time would soon be accompanied by the process of enlarging the community to become the European Union, following the huge political changes that we saw in Europe at the end of the 1980s. And if we look back now, it was a huge effort on all sides to extend the internal market to the 10 new member states that joined in 2004. And this brought them into the internal market on the basis of the alignment of their legislation with the European acquis and the development of their national administrations to meet the demands of transposition, implementation and enforcement to the same level as that in the existing member states. And here again, it's essential to note the importance of similar rights and obligations and the existence of a level playing field across the board for everyone. Now, for the EEA EFTA states, of course, the starting point was different. But we could say that the logic was similar in terms of attraction towards the European internal market. So when the EEA was concluded in December 1993, that was between 12 EU member states at the time and 7 EFTA states. And the objective of the association was made clear with a high-profile references to the fullest possible realization of the free movement of goods, persons, services, and capital, as well as strengthen cooperation in flanking and horizontal policies. And indeed, the very first article of the EEA agreement refers to continuous and balanced strengthening of trade and economic relations, equal conditions of competition, and respect of the same rules. So from our perspective in the European Commission, and in view of ensuring that the same conditions apply across the board, it's very important to underline the provisions on decision-making that are contained in the EEA agreement. These are unique, and they help to explain how the machinery has continued to function very well over almost 30 years. Now, I won't go into the details of the components. These are addressed elsewhere in today's seminar. But all of these components are, of course, crucial for the functioning of the agreement and the wider internal market and the establishment of mutual trust, which is necessary to keep things moving forward. I will, however, mention some of the provisions of the EEA agreement that are crucial for our work as coordinators in the Commission and as representatives of the Union in the decision-making structures. First thing is the need to guarantee legal security and homogeneity. This means that an EEA joint committee decision incorporating relevant EU legal acts into the EEA agreement should be taken as closely as possible to the adoption by the community of the corresponding new legislation. I'm quoting from Article 102 of the agreement. So it's very important to try to ensure that the time gap between the adoption of the EU level legislation and the adoption of the EEA joint committee decisions is as short as possible. One important thing to mention is the need on the EU side, which has become more frequent recently, to consult the Council on substantive adaptations to legislation that are requested by the EEA EFTA side. So it's not always a case of making a carbon copy of the EU legislation and pasting it into an annex of the EEA agreement. And in such cases, we are required to present the file to the EFTA Working Party that I mentioned, together with the line DG in the Commission that is responsible for the policy area. And we have to note that member states take an increasingly keen interest in knowing more about requested adaptations and the reasons why they are considered to be necessary before they agree to the Union position for the joint committee decision. So some final remarks, excuse me. Functioning of the agreement and the maintenance of the enlarged internal market is not simply a dry legal process on both sides. It also requires political will and engagement, strong commitment from all sides to keep the wheels oiled, the processes predictable, and the exchange of information transparent and reliable. And it's only through that close cooperation that we are able, as we did in 2022, to adopt 354 joint committee decisions, which incorporated 628 legal acts. And I will also mention some underlying principles from the Council. You may know that in June of last year, the Council adopted some conclusions on the enlarged internal market, which of course made reference to the EEA. And here, the conclusions underlined the principles, again, of homogeneity, legal certainty, guaranteeing the efficiency, sustainability, and credibility of the internal market. And looking to the future, the next 30 years, we will need to sustain the same levels of political administrative commitment to the agreement and maintain the homogeneity and credibility of our shared market. And in the face of new and evolving challenges and threats, such as the geopolitical tensions, global competition, climate-related issues, strategic dependencies, it's the internal market, which is framed by the EEA agreement, which is the context within which we will address those challenges and issues together. Thank you very much.